Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Fireside Chat hosted by Impact Collective for Circular Economy and Future of Waste Management. So I will be your moderator today. My name is Charlotte, and I am the Impact Manager here at Impact Collective, as well as the Sustainable Innovation Officer at the World Federation of UN Associations. On behalf of my organization, we've been working a lot around, solving urban challenges using sustainable innovation developed by startups around APAC. And so we're super excited to have a wonderful thought leader join us today, Ying, who is co-founder and CEO of Future Urban Living. And, just a couple highlights. She's also been appointed Fellow of Circular Economy Council at Blockchain Climate Institute. She's a Global Shaper alumni for the Council of World Economic Forum and is the former U.S. Vice President Al Gore's Climate Realty Leader, among other things. She'll be able to, I think, give a better insight on her profile as well as why she is working around the circular economy. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Lou. Can you say a few words about your background, what you do, and what inspired you to start up Future Urban Living?
Sure. Thank you, Charlotte, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you, first of all, for having me. Love to be here. Really seeing the lovely emojis out there. A quick word about myself. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Future Urban Living, as Charlotte already mentioned. Context to this is my background is from business. So I was born in Shanghai, raised in Finland, lived in different places, and built my entire life to opt for an international sort of setting. And from there, to give context to Future Urban Living, roughly 5-6 years ago, I was CEO of a manufacturing company in Shanghai. And at the time, we were trying to do sustainability projects for our production lines and everything that we were doing. But also, I realized how difficult and challenging it was even to get sustainability efforts to be on my top 20 priority list. We're talking about top 20, not even top 5. Huh? And in that role, started exploring a lot of different options of doing things. And at the same time, I was a global shaper, and I still am. I started in 2016, Global Shapers of the World Economic Forum. It's a community of impact makers. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the community, but very focused on impact-driven projects while running a company at the same time, and really wanted to merge these ideologies together, but it was difficult. So a fellow shaper at the time, we were working on a future cities project that was really challenging our way of thinking how our future cities would work and infrastructure and all these big problems. And when we dove into that, we had a lot of fun, and also realized very quickly what a challenging and complex issue we're dealing with when we're talking about urban migration, climate change, population growth, all this. And very quickly realized that we need experts from all over different industries, interdisciplinary approach into tackling what we were even discussing. And long story short, that pushed us even more towards, okay, what could we do here? At the time, I was a person from business background, manufacturing C-level, trying to find ways to do things more sustainably, but struggling with it because it was very challenging. And we're talking about 2015, 2016 Shanghai, right? So times are different today, but specifically then. And then my co-founder was a designer, specifically from service design background, thinking how can we utilize design better for real problems. So we sort of merged our brains and approaches together, and this became Future Urban Living. So what we do today is circular design and strategy to help companies, organizations to transit or transform towards circular economy. So that's me, a little bit of context.
That's great. I think what you highlighted already by mentioning that sustainability, putting it at the core of your business was a challenge, is something that a lot of startups experience. Um, what would you say was the shift that made you see circularity as a new lens for business strategy? And maybe could you highlight what are some incentives that businesses should have to start moving towards this if they haven't already thought about it?
Sure. Why is circularity an important lens in all of this? If you look at any trends, macro trends, mega trends, where the trajectory, so to speak, where we're on and where the world is probably going towards, there's certain things, demographics. We can look at population growth, right? Historically, how fast it's grown, how fast it is still growing, resource scarcity, growing volatility, technological advancement, all these things are happening simultaneously. And I personally simply don't think the world will last like this, and businesses doing business as usual, it simply won't last with these numbers and statistics in place, right? Either we're entering in a very gloomy world war scene, or we will, take this opportunity and really try to get quite creative and innovative, and I'm more on the latter side. So that's where the circular lens comes in. And one of the major reasons why circular economy speaks to me so much is because it's not just an environmental lens. Traditionally, environmental disciplines, I would say, have been or could be considered even quite a bit of a trade-off from the traditional business-driven thinking. So there's, the big, I'm exaggerating obviously, but big bad evil corporates that are soulless in making their decisions, and then there's environmental activism, and it's always a little bit like this. And I know I was never a big fan of that. It's too black and white. So circular economy offers us an instrument or an approach that actually caters to both and even more. And the pluralistic lens of circular economy, to me personally, is the most important one. So it's not just about maximizing your environmental values, but it's also about your financial values and your social values, and what can you do with that. So in Europe, oftentimes, we could talk about circular economy in a pretty ideological way. It's something that we should do. It's something that is important, and it's the right thing to do. When I speak with people in, I don't like this term, but developing markets, if you know what I mean. For instance, in China, a lot of it is about well, if I'm struggling to, feed my family, pay my bills, just rising to middle class, there's not necessarily a lot of room to think about environmental footprint. This is the way it's been more conventionally. It is changing, especially amongst our generation and younger generations. And I see this very, very strongly, which is great. But that gives you my background, why I think circular economy is such a good instrument in solving problems that cater to lots of different stakeholders with different interests. And to your second question, what incentivizes businesses today to move towards circularity? Well, I think there's a lot happening already. 2020 global pandemic did give a major push to the whole world in terms of, okay, reset, what are we doing in here? What are we trying to do in here? And I think a lot of companies are already questioning the way they operate, the way they create value, which is great, but also a lot of consumers, a lot of policymakers. And this is something that needs a push from all fronts. And I think it is all happening. We do have a deadline to this, though, right? It's not like we can be here for forever and exploit resources. But within the next decade, I think a lot of things are already changing. Policies are starting to shift. Consumers are really starting to vote on their wallets as well. And a lot of companies are asking how, no longer why. And when we're talking about a global supply chain or a value chain level, any demand anywhere across that value chain is going to have ripple effects all over. To give you an example, a fashion brand in Europe demanding sustainable materials, for instance, or traceability across the entire value chain will affect all the way back to where that original cotton was sourced from and so forward. So I do think these things are already happening, fortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think this idea that we are in a period of transition is quite promising. There is a lot of potential to bring a lot of stakeholders on board to accelerate what we're doing across industries. And I think what you're doing specifically with future urban living is exactly, at the core of all this. You also mentioned that financial gain is intrinsically tied in with environmental and social factors, which is very true. I mean, if anything, the last year has shown that these are important to consider for the resiliency of businesses around the world, right? Actually, going a little bit on this maybe and what you've been doing, I know that you talk a lot about systemic change. And last year you actually posted an article where you wrote that the backbone of the circular economy is systemic design. What are the big picture systemic changes that you think we'll have to do eventually in the grander scheme of things?
That's a great question. I think there are many, but one big, I would say, tangible shift or change that we're starting to see already and predict will happen is the way we measure things and metrics. So today, GDPs, for instance, are the standard ways of looking at a country, but this will change. Also, companies, a lot of startups in this ecosystem today that we're speaking to. If you are looking for investors and you're doing an investor pitch, for instance, you already know what these investors are asking for, more or less, right? There's certain things they're going to be interested in, and these metrics will change. So instead of just looking at your traffic or your growth or your, financial numbers, there will be more of your carbon footprint, the amount of waste, your circularity, perhaps. This is what we're hoping for. I'm biased, obviously, but these type of changes, and I think that itself will already reorganize the way we think about the way we create value, right? The way we invest, the time span in which we invest. What do we invest in? What do we buy? What do we, and so forth. So that shift is probably one of the bigger tangible things that I see moving forward. Now, a little bit to what systemic, how is this systemic, right, in all of this? I think our current world, and I mentioned this a little bit before, a lot of companies do want to change. It's not that they don't want to. There's a lot of effort and serious willingness to do that, but there's a lot of legacy infrastructure as well, and our world has been optimized very well for a linear economy. It's cost effective, it's very efficient, so to change that always takes a little bit of time, and today, to make those seriously impactful changes, where we talk about what you can control as a company directly, what is a little bit outside of your control, so indirect, so scope 2 or scope 3 emissions, as some might call them, they're much more difficult. And then we expand even further across your entire global value chain. How much can you control? How much should you be able to control? What's your responsibility, and so forward. So if I am a fashion brand, does my responsibility extend all the way to how the materials are being sourced, and all the way to when these clothes are discarded, or somewhere in between, and so forth? And this is a discussion I see that is happening quite a bit. And traditionally, we have been quite siloed, right? Siloed in the global value chain, siloed in industry, siloed in a certain function. And now it's like, okay, let's zoom out. Let's not be the blind men touching the elephant. I don't know if you guys know this story, but
Right.
There's this old story of an elephant and blind men around it, and they touch one part, and they're being asked, what does an elephant look like? And they all have a different opinion, obviously.
Right, because they're touching a different part of the elephant. Yes.
Exactly. So our world, to if I had to compare it to something, it reminds me of that sometimes. Like we only see our part of it, and it's very difficult to step out and think more holistically and more in a system. Like what is this animal really? What are we dealing with? How can we collaborate together to deal with this challenge that is a challenge to all of us?
Right. Right. I mean, based on that, you have worked across several different markets in the EU, the US, and Asia. What do you see as the biggest differences in circular economy adoption across these markets? And where do you see opportunities, particularly in Asia Pacific?
They're very different. Yeah, I don't need to tell you guys that it's very, very different. I would say this, Western markets, generally speaking, and there's a lot of generalization in here, are on a much more ideological conversation with a circular economy. So I mentioned a little bit about this before. It's not so much about the why anymore. It's genuinely about how and what can we do together and so forward. It's not everywhere, and it's not across all levels of organizations, but we are seeing this push happening quite strongly. We see a lot of green campaigns. Some might call it, greenwashing. If you look at a lot of companies' websites these days, especially from Western companies, they've all, the narrative is very green overall, and this has changed in a very short time. And we see a clear demand and a clear pull and push towards that direction. Whereas APAC, Asia, I see it a bit different. I do see a lot of opportunity there, though. So Asia Pacific and Southeast Asia, for instance, is so young in demographics, right? Population growth, a lot of young people. There's a lot of good energy, so to speak, in terms of like everything is possible. And we're building a lot of infrastructure, like fundamental infrastructure, which allows us to jump huge development steps into what's available today with the newest technology, and how can we make things, how can we design things to be more circular by default. So I think a lot of companies in Asia Pacific today can leverage this quite differently from the more developed Western world. Western world has that, or developed places generally have more legacy systems to think about, right? Infrastructure and so forth. So how do we retrofit certain things, and how do we step by step change those things? China, to give you guys an example, a couple of years ago, when there were no strong payment systems, that gave great push for mobile payments, which are dominating today, right? And the adoption was so high and so fast because of this. So this can be applied across different industries, and this mentality of, hey, sustainable and it's convenient, I think will resonate with a lot of, especially young population all over the world.
Agreed. I definitely see this dynamic energy that's happening within Asia Pacific. And in terms of maybe bypassing some of the legacy systems, I mean, that's definitely the case. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do leapfrogging and adoption of technologies to advance certain things instead of going step by step as it's been done in other places. So very excited to see how the story will unfold in the next couple of years. Maybe, do you have a favorite story you can share about one of the circular business transformation that you've supported through Future Urban Living?
Sure.
So I know there could fit a bit of them.
So maybe one worth mentioning, which was a great jump for us towards the systemic thinking as well. This was more of a research project more than anything else, but it was on air travel, global air travel, And this was beginning of 2020. So when the pandemic was happening and all these changes were happening, cross travel, obviously, it was taking a huge hit. But it was a very interesting time to step back and really look at what was happening in the industry. And it allowed us, we were basically studying, okay, how could air travel become more circular? Is that possible? How would we even approach it, right? Do we look at the airplanes, the engines? Do we look at the airports, which are built environment essentially? Or do we look at the air travel when you're on air, or the entire experience? And in the end, we merged everything together and came to the conclusion that everything could be and should be much, much more streamlined. But it was also one of those projects that made us realize very quickly how siloed our world is. And this is a great real world example of air travel is very, very complex. There are a lot of international regulations, safety standards, different operators operating at different sectors. So how would you put this all together, get all these key stakeholders into one room, sit around the same table, and discuss something that may be or may not be an interest of theirs, right? And if the main umbrella theme is, hey, let's make this more circular, more efficient, and more sustainable, everyone's got to have something beneficial for them. So how do you build that, and how do you make that happen? So that was a fascinating project in that sense, which was very, very complex, but for us also to realize that, okay, this is what we're dealing with. We really need to zoom out and step back and think in systems. There's no other way to deal with this otherwise. Maybe another more tangible project worth mentioning we had a lot of fun with was this cosmetics brand. There was a new line. I can't talk about this too much, but what was very interesting is a very traditional product, as many of our ladies here will probably know, or men as well, why not, on mascara, eye makeup, and we wanted to transform that single product, a consumer product, into a service model that would be refillable by design, and also the entire product and service would be on a digital platform. So instead of just selling a mascara, for instance, it would be a digital platform where people would share their tips with each other, and also how you refill, how you order, and everything. And that became quite a fun thing to work on.
That sounds great. So there are two words that I've been seeing pop up a lot. One of them is silos, breaking down silos, because you mentioned there's a lot of good things happening, but just not enough communication. Mm-hmm. And I think you play a really important role then in bridging these gaps to create better innovation. The other is also this it's just in relation to your last example, this idea of like building a community of people that can interact and also are educated on the matter, beyond just people that are working in the industry and sustainability, right? Uh-huh. So I think one thing maybe that would help the audience is if you could recommend maybe 2 to 3 people in the circular economy space to follow, in addition to you, of course. And where would you direct people to go if they wanted to learn more about this?
So I think there are a lot of great people in this space, but instead of perhaps naming personal names, I think it's such a big team effort. I would probably advise a few resources or organizations, and if people want to learn more, and that's a great question, because this is the first step of being aware of what could be done and what's out there and best practices perhaps already, I would definitely say Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Yes. To me, they're like the queen and the king of circularity, but also talk about it to me in such an optimistic way that I think is a great approach to tackle this, right? There's a lot to be done. What can we do? What has already been done? So that's one. Great resources. They share a lot of great publications as well. Another great one, I would say Sitra, which is funded by the Finnish government. It's an innovation fund, and they do great work on circular economy as well. For instance, if anyone is interested in national circularity roadmap, so this is a government strategic plan to transit towards circularity. What could they do? What are the steps? And it's sort of a playbook or a toolkit to make that happen. They do great work on that. So EMF and the MacArthur Foundation, Citra. And then the third one I would mention is the concept called C2C, so Cradle to Cradle. There's also a book published with its name. And to us, it's very much at the heart of what we're trying to do, right? So it's the entire ideology is natural resources and circulating them back into the system. How can you do that? And it takes great inspiration from nature, obviously. So in our field, waste to us is a design error, right? If you look at nature, there isn't waste. So how could we build things and develop them in a way that there wouldn't be waste or pollution at all? That all externalities, so to speak, would be either reutilized or they would have a different type of a purpose, or they wouldn't be that at all. So that book is a great inspiration to that world, I think.
Great resources. I like that you also gave a little bit for everyone. So whether you are trying to develop your startup, or whether you are working more on the policy aspect of it, or just a consumer that wants to learn more, very excited to have people explore those more. I think I did receive a couple of Q&As. One of them was maybe looking at, if you're coming at this as an entrepreneur, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to reorient yourself towards this. Mm-hmm. What would be a key tip that you would advise startups to look at, or entrepreneurs to look at when they're trying to integrate this circularity, this concept, into their business model? Bearing in mind that a lot of startups do have to be lean in the way that they design things, and it needs to be able to adapt with what they have to do. So.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. That's a great question. I think especially if you're a startup and you get to design things and develop things and build things from the scratch without having to think anything in legacy, have circularity in your DNA. Like, this is what I would advise. Design it into your offering, your service. Really break it down. Ask, what is it that your customers are paying you for? You're probably asking this already, right? Regardless of what you do. But what really is the value that they're paying you for? Is it, if you're a car manufacturer, are they paying you for that vehicle, the status, or are they paying you for just getting from A to B, or something else? Do you need a car to do that necessarily, and so forth? This takes us back a little bit on the fundamental steps of creating value. But I think some of the exciting startups I see in the space today are either disrupting traditional items, something simple as a watch, something like a sporting brand, anything, by fundamentally being circular. It's either built in their product or it's built in their entire business models, the circulation thinking, or it's something else. And I would highly advise that to be a very, very early step already planned in, because you can. For larger corporations, it's much harder for them to make that, because it's a change, right? It's a step strategic roadmap that they have to change one by one, make investments and so forward. So if you're starting from the scratch, have that, because you're riding a wave basically that is a mega trend, and the way I see it, it can only be beneficial for you. So yeah, those are the lines I would say today. And obviously, educate yourself with what can be done. There are a lot of best practices already, but overall, it's a very emerging collaborative space still today. If any of you work with emerging technologies, you will know how, schools never taught us this. We had to learn everything from the internet or from the communities. So it's similar, I think, in circular economy today. A lot is being developed as we go, and you have a big possibility to be there with your product and your offering, shaping that overall landscape. And there's a lot of collaborative effort in this space, which is quite cool as well.
Yeah, I mean, very inspiring words. I think this idea of how there's a massive opportunity to be tapped into right now is really important for people to keep in mind, especially because when, as you mentioned, you know, people are looking at emerging technologies and revising the way that we're using certain items that, you know, have been around for quite a while. It's a way also for them to set new industry standards of what it means to do business nowadays, right? As aligned with impact, sustainability, and making profit. There's definitely opportunities for entrepreneurs at whatever stage to tap into communities. I mean, one of them is definitely a little plug-in right now, but Impact Collective. We have been working around this. You know, we bring together city governments, UN representatives, policymakers, entrepreneurs, investors, to really bridge these silos that you're talking about. And we're super excited to have a wonderful cohort who are working on this, some of which are already present in the room, and we'll get to know a little bit more intimately later. But I do want to encourage everyone who is listening out there to go and visit the Impact Collective website, because we are pioneering a democratic capital allocation, which basically means that since we're community driven, we want to get snapshots of what people want to see in their region, in Asia Pacific, right? What innovation will best answer their challenges and help accelerate impact in Asia Pacific. And so I invite you to go check out the platform. You know, we need community voters from all around. The more, the better. You know, diversity is really, really important to us, inclusion and diversity. So if we can get as many people as possible to go in and support all these startups, these innovators who are really working on great solutions to try and accelerate impact in the region, would be much appreciated. So along with that, I'm actually going to start the Q&A portion. We did receive a couple for you, in addition to the one that I asked. The first one, Lou, is what's the biggest barrier to circular design? What is holding us or companies back from taking this approach as a default?
What's the biggest barrier to circular design? I think that's a great question. To be very frank, I think it's awareness of it. Especially from, I'm talking from, I would say, business strategy perspective, where traditionally speaking, C-levels aren't so much from design background, which is a shame, because I think there's a lot of creative approaches and toolkits there available that could be utilized very differently. So simply awareness, traditionally speaking, of what design can do, and it can be a very powerful tool, right? It sort of lends itself to be this creative approach, quite abstract, quite vague sometimes, from traditional analytical business thinking. But in a world where we don't have solutions or answers just yet necessarily, we have a great deal, but it's more important still to be asking a lot of questions. And I think here design thinking plays a huge role. So simply awareness, I would say, is a big one. But on another hand, good design and bad design, how do you measure something like that, right? And if this could be communicated clearer, especially in systemic design, which is already very abstract and very vague and very big, that helps a lot. Because in the end of the day, if we look at, you know, startups, private sector companies, the way we operate is through metrics. What gets measured gets managed. You have KPIs and so forward. So if you can place that, it's super helpful. Without it, I fear it will always stay and be perceived a little vague from strategic decision-making point of view. So I think an interesting approach to look at this question is, how can we use design and plug it in together with other disciplines together to form something that is very useful for strategic decision making. here, everything like data, for instance, and blockchain, for instance, just as an example, might be some pretty interesting elements to add together with design and to support decision making. So I would say there. I don't know if this answered your question, but I think this is where I am seeing things.
Thank you so much. We just got another question saying, you mentioned the importance of using systemic approach to implement circular design, which usually requires heavy government support, which is usually slow and a bit, has some barriers. So if you are a startup with limited resources and need super fast growth, how do you navigate this environment?
Yes, so systemic approach can be looked at many different ways. If we really zoom out and look at what needs to be done, I agree with you that it needs policy support from consumers, from everywhere. But already as a startup, lean, if let's say you're focused on one product, there are systems within your ecosystem that you operate in, which are in direct and indirect control of yours. And there's a lot that you can leverage with this. So, for instance, when we talk about systemic thinking or systemic design, traditionally as a business, if I am designing a pair of headphones for a user, I might use user-centric design or user-centric approach to do that, right? What does my customer want? What does my customer demographic look like? Okay, they're a female, they're a 30-year-old, they're located in this place, therefore they will do X, Y, and Z. This is a very conventional way of thinking things, and then you try to match that. If we step back a little bit and take more systems thinking into consideration, we won't just look at the user alone, but we will also consider the local context. We'll zoom back even more, and we will take into consideration the nature. We use a tool called the Systemic 4 in our work, which is the user, the business, the local infrastructure or the community, the context, so to speak, and the ecosystem, which is the natural ecosystem. And we have all these 4 personas when we're trying to design and develop something, and it can slow you down a little bit in terms of an approach and a mentality. It's quite, it can be quite heavy, but it also allows you to design and develop business models that aren't just user-centric. So in this headphones case, you get to think a little bit more. So what happens when the user is done with my great headphones, right? Do they just throw it away? Or could I implement that into my service model where they're only renting these headphones, for instance, or they could be designed to be dismantled so they can repair or replace one item or one part of it so they don't have to chuck the whole thing away. What does that give to me as a startup? Well, that's customer loyalty, potentially, or following feedback loops, which we talk about a lot as well. And it's very unexplored, in my opinion. We pay a lot of money to acquire these end consumers, but we already have a lot of ways to involve them in our community today. So these are just examples of how we can think of it, and that's a system that is in your control, right? It doesn't necessarily require policy so much. If you design your headphones to be dismantlable, or I'm not sure that's a real word, or remanufacturable to you keep your materials in the loop as much as possible. Not everything is possible, but you try to maximize that. And that will make you stand out already as a headphone maker. And that gives you another narrative to write by and so forward. So a lot of things in here that are also within our control, I believe.
Great answer. I think this idea that sometimes waiting for regulation to be put into place to support what you're doing can be frustrating if you're innovating, but as you rightly mentioned, there are ways around it. Once again, I think it's this idea that entrepreneurs are the ones that are leading, not just entrepreneurs, innovators in general are the ones that are leading the conversation. And, policy tends to follow a little bit later. And because they're also adapting to the changing environment, and because they're responding, they can't lead, right? And so I think there does need to be a lot of interaction between different sectors. Once again, this idea of breaking silos is really important.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think through the work that you've been doing and the various affiliations that you have, it seems like you've gotten really good insights
Thank
on all
you.
these. Did you? So I see another question here about your Medium article, actually, and how you quoted a couple of examples on S&P 500 or Global 2000 firms and transformations that were able to develop new growth outside of their traditional core, aligned with impact or circularity. This is just a call for more examples. There's a follow-up question that's associated with this. I think following this idea of awareness that you were mentioning, the audience seems to be asking to get a couple of case studies or best practices that you're interested in sharing with them, so that they can read more about it.
Okay. Best practices in general within circular economy, right?
Yep.
Okay, because I think this study referred to specifically on how these corporates had been leading change, if I remember correctly. But in terms of circular best practices and solutions, there are some quite good ones. One I like to refer to is called the mud jeans. Some of you might have heard of them, but the idea is very, very simple. So a traditional pair of just a pair of jeans, but as a fashion item, it also is one of the more polluting items, right? A lot of resources are used to make that pair of jeans that you're wearing. So this founder, it's a Dutch brand, quite early on already, made it part of their business model that instead of buying jeans, a customer will rent jeans and pay a subscription. And then once you agree to that, they make you sign an agreement. As a buyer, I now have to sign an agreement that after I'm done with these pair of jeans, I have to return them. And so let's say I wear them for 2 years or 3 years or whatever, and then I bring them back, they get upcycled. And at that upcycle level, some call it secondhand. There's a certain culture in that already, and once it's done, and it cannot be upcycled anymore, it gets shred and turned back into original pair of new jeans. And I think up to something like 70% or 80% even of the older material is reused, which is very, very high. So it's a very interesting model to look at. And when they did something like this, for instance, they designed the entire. So jeans are quite simple in terms of the design. The traditional leather patch that you have in the back, they changed that into a print simply because it's easier to shred that and make everything out of organic cotton than had different materials mixed up and shred that into pieces. So that was very well designed and planned into the entire cycle of their business model. And that's just one of the examples. Another one perhaps worth mentioning is this company, juice company, who obviously had a lot of industrial juice waste or food waste, but these would be lemon and orange peels and such that could not be used for the actual beverage. And those were being used for textile and fabrics to make new clothes and fashion items. So this crosses industry now, which is very interesting as well. And, it's a waste for your food industry, but it is a resource for the fashion industry, potentially. So in this case, they were able to utilize that. And there are plenty of examples of crossing industries and repurposing, for instance, food waste, cacao waste into sneakers and this and that and so forward. How to make it a sustainable loop is an interesting question, and how to make that last over and over again is something worth looking into. But those are just a few examples on top of my mind.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, I think we're just about out of time now for our for this part of the event, and I would like to thank you once again for your wonderful contributions. I think our public gained a lot of different insights on this, and a lot of good resources to use, which I think is really, really important. For now, I would like to ask Lou and our impact makers to stay on. And for people that have tuned in, we would like to say thank you again for joining us for this session. And Lou Ying is an amazing speaker, as you can tell. Feel free to check out her resources on LinkedIn and on our profiles, and we will be in touch. We'll see you again next week with a new Fireside Chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, we do have one question that we didn't answer.
Oh, okay.
That I just highlighted here.
Yes.
Maybe, I don't know, if JT is still on the call, maybe we could ask JT to come on stage.
Yep. Marta, are we still streaming live?
No, I'm turning it off right now.
Okay, great. Then I invite JT to share his question along to you.
Yeah, sure. Hello. Can you hear me?
Hi there.
Yes.
Hey, everybody. Wow, there was a wonderful talk earlier. And so I'm calling all the way from Manila, and I run this ag tech startup. And since we are involved in the agriculture space, there's definitely a lot of application of the circular economy thinking and the circular design thinking in agri, right? Like the valorization of food waste, utilization of side streams. And I'm just wondering for our speaker today, I'm just wondering, how did the COVID pandemic alter or reshape some of the fundamental methodologies and principles that you have, in undertaking circular design, right? Did it dramatically reshape some of those principles? Did it give birth to new principles when it comes to circular design? And really, like, what does the future look like for circular design in the next normal, whenever that may come up?
Thank you, JT. How did pandemic affect us? Well, a lot, actually. I think the pandemic was a great awakening, almost, if not a great reset, sort of, for a lot of individuals, companies, governments, to rethink their roles. First of all, like, who am I? What am I doing? What's my role? What am I supposed to do as a policymaker, as a decision maker, as a mother, as a whatever it is that you are? And that wave pushed a lot of questions towards our direction. And also, when people were in this questioning sort of state, I think there were a lot of exploration of, okay, so our system seems to be pretty broken. What are the other alternative ways of doing things? And to give you a bit of context, me saying, especially in Shanghai, 2017, 2018, that I'm in circular economy and blockchain, 9 out of 10 people would start by what is circular economy, one, and what is blockchain, right? And what do they have to do with each other? So from there, it's a pretty long way still to go to, hey, we actually want to make our company circular, right? So that's the giant leap that I've seen personally in my circles and everything, that has changed drastically in just with the pandemic, and that's great. But also, I think these circular economy as a concept, even if it feels new or emerging, my experience is that people catch up very, very quickly. And once they do, the principles are pretty simple, right? It's not rocket science. So they're like, okay, I can do this, I can do that. And instantly you're already in a very different type of a mindset. You're not thinking in a traditional linear way, but in the circular mindset, you're like, okay, would that be possible? And would that be possible? And you're asking a lot of questions, and really healthy and very welcome. So that's the level of change we've seen. Companies have woken up to realize that, okay, if we keep doing what we're doing, even if we don't speak about environment, not everyone's interested in environment or climate change, right? That's fine. Even if we are not interested in that sense, it is quite clear that going like this, we will become obsolete in X amount of years. How do we adapt to that? How can we, follow the trend, so to speak, if we don't want to lead it? And that's fine too. And that's also shifting more towards our world. So those would be the main things that I'm seeing. And then you asked, where is circular economy going, or circular thinking moving towards to in the future? To be honest with you, I hope and I see it to be the default economic system of the future. So today we have our own market-led economy, right, that works on its own principles. Circular economy is not a new product, new service, or a new, one single thing. It's an economic system, just like capitalistic system is to us today. And I'm hoping that everything will be rearranged around that. And that said, circular economy is not a end destination itself. It doesn't have any value itself, but it's a great instrument and tool to get there, to get to a net zero world where things are being operated in a circular fashion by default. And I'm hoping that, a couple of generations from today, someone will look past this conversation and be like, what an outdated conversation. That'll be great, because then that means that everyone is so in circularity that they don't even believe a world that wasn't. That's my outlook. It's pretty optimistic, as you can see, but I really believe in it.
I love it. It's so positive. And a good thing to set as a milestone.
Right.
Thanks, JT. Let's see. Do we have Mayani on the call who would like to ask a question?
Mayani?
Yes. I think Steph wrote inside the chat.
That was JT's question.
Pardon?
That was JT's question.
Great. Then we have one more question here from the audience. How do you work with companies to implement systematic design? Do you hold workshops or provide consultation services? If so, how do you track the progress and impact of the companies?
Okay, that's a great question, a very tangible one. I love that. So the way we work is we are a service company, right? We don't have a tangible product itself, but we work through design thinking and strategic consultation. So what we do usually depends on the client, on their specific situation and the problem, so to speak. But we usually do some kind of mapping, a value chain mapping of where they are, what can be done, where are the pain points. We try to identify that together. And through those pain points, we don't try to fix what's already working, but usually all companies have pain points and all companies have this and that challenges just from business perspective that we try to get into and try to make it more circular. This is where the design process starts coming in. And it's a pretty, depending on the client and the project, it can be a very creative process. It can be a very iterative process as well, which makes these projects a lot of fun. If you know what I mean, there is no one standard project. We tailor make every solution to these companies. And one of the more exciting things that we're starting to see is more and more corporates are starting to ask, I don't want to say the right questions, but difficult questions that there are no direct answers to. So things like, we use palm oil in our plastic toothbrush, as an example. but is it our problem, or is it the problem of the entire value chain, right? How could we approach and solve this? Okay, now we're looking at potentially a collaboration that is cross-enterprise or cross-industry even. What can be done together? Who can we bring around the same table? How can we align the vision, the goals, the shared interests, and who's paying the bill, essentially, too, right? And how can we make this in a way that is beneficial for all of you guys? So that's the direction that we're moving towards to now. How do we track progress and impact of these companies? There are different ways, but us in Circularity, we're quite focused on ratios or percentages of circularity. Some people, there are a lot of companies that measure and calculate carbon footprint, for instance, and there are different methods for that as well. But in our world, how circular is your product, unit, business in a certain scope is important. So we like to calculate that. And, our world isn't very circular today. It's less than 9%, which means over 90% doesn't get circulated. It ends up somewhere in the waste streams. So we have a lot to do with that part. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll probably be sending everyone to the chat lounge in a bit to do a bit of chatting, but maybe
Cool.
I do have one final question that's a little bit more on maybe how you set up your business.
Mm-hmm.
So from like a more business point of view, what were some challenges that you faced? And maybe are there any milestones that you hit where you felt confident about your product and you moved forward with it, or your services?
Yeah. Super important question. To be honest with you, we started more as a think tank than anything else, I think. All over the place. We had, our thoughts and the things that we wanted to do, but obviously when it comes to being a business, it's a very different game. Right. So we were exploring all these big themes. What could we do? How can we leverage our expert partner network all over the world? But are we focused on one industry or multiple industries? And we did try and test a lot of different things. We started from the built environment, for instance, right? So we're industry focused. My background was specifically coming from more from the built environment. So we thought, okay, this is great. But very soon realized that, okay, hold on. If we want to talk about circular economy, the benefit is to leverage different industries. Because as I was mentioning before, the food waste cannot be reutilized perhaps in the food industry anymore, but it can be reutilized in a fashion industry, which is completely different, and so forward. So it pushed us out from the original industry where we tried to be a bit more lean. So in the beginning, to be honest, we were all over the place discussing this topic, and it was like, okay. I remember talking to some family members, and they were like, the level of problems, like I get it that you guys are trying to solve real problems, but the level of problems is something that a president of a country should be considering, not you guys. And that was a funny thing because it did feel like that. We were all over the place. So I would say a major milestone for us internally was to be able to really narrow that down into, okay, within this big space, what is our role? What can we do? What are clients paying for? And what kind of a scope, time span, and so forth? What are the actual tangible results and deliverables and da-da-da-da? And in a service industry, I don't know if there are any service startups in here, it does come down to those type of things, and then just testing and finding the right fit, right? And what was challenging, and I think still is sometimes, is to be able to get to a strategic level change that I personally am so keen on. And this specifically comes from the background that I was a manufacturing C-level and wanted to bring so much change, right, into the world where we are now, where from business perspective, we're a third party providing X service. And corporates are very used to working with all types of innovators and designers and consultants and this and that on specific smaller projects. But to talk about circular economy or systems level change this size, sometimes the level that we're pushing for can be quite challenging. Yeah, of course, which is completely understandable, right?
Of course.
So this is definitely something that we wish there to be more strategic circular level change versus just one. But oftentimes it starts from step 1, step 2, step 3, and so forward, and it moves forward. So
right. Well, I mean, one key takeaway, though, I think from this last comment is that partnerships across different industries is quite important to make sure that we explore different options. Because as much as we would like it, we can't be experts in every single industry, and so I think it's only by talking to people outside of our industries that we can brainstorm and come up with better solutions and create better innovation.
Yes.
And with that, would you like to give any final words before we jump into the lounge where we can mingle and virtually mingle and get to know each other and have the teams maybe ask a few more personal questions?
Maybe just a big thanks to everyone for showing up. I think this is already great, right? I think, the sustainability and circular space is one of those that, to me personally, I know a lot of people perhaps came into this mindset or space from environmental perspective, while for me it was a huge driver. One of the bigger things was the ability to bring very diverse people with different interests around the same table to discuss something that was important to all of us. And if that's the power of circular economy, then I wish we're all able to practice that one way or another in our startups. When we're building something new, it's a great opportunity for you guys to really think how you're creating value, right? Like, what is the problem that you're solving? Who's benefiting from it? And what's the, what are you really trying to change or do with your product or service? I think, that's my end question out there to the world. But thank you everyone for being here today, and thank you for having me.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We were very happy to have you here. And I think I'm going to invite everyone to join into the lounge to chat a little more.
Yes.
Perfect.
Let me just give you all a little bit of a brief on the logistics. Yes. So I'm going to turn up the session in a second. And there's several tables. One of them has Lou's name on it. So Lou, you can sit there. Literally click on the table and you'll be able to sit. So if you want to chat with Lou, you can go and sit. And with Lou, you can sit with us, the Impact Collective crew, or you can sit at another table and just chat with other people. So we'll see you all in the lounge room in a second. Thank you.
And the session will be open for, I think, 30 minutes max. So we'll be optimizing our time then.
Perfect.
Thank you.